Hello and welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Kiri Meyer.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
We're thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating a community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one needs to grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people in this field so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. We are pleased to welcome Tricia LaVoice to our show. Tricia has earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Applied Psychology from California State University, Long Beach, and a Master's of Science degree in Educational Psychology from Fordham University. Tricia is a writer, speaker, and blogger for children and adults. She is the founder of Wishes for the Heart, Inc., and has written a series of Wishes books.
So welcome, Tricia. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I've read your book, Dear Martha, WTF, and I'm wondering if you can tell our listeners a little bit about the passion behind why you wanted to share this experience.
Well, I think what happened, to just give the readers a little bit of a background, when I was 31, I was a young mother, and I was very close to my parents. My mother was my best friend, and they died in a car accident, tragically, and my life turned upside down. And at that time, I think for the first couple of years, I think if I look at it with grief, when a child like falls and hurts themselves and they're holding their breath and then finally they let out the scream. So for the first couple of years after the accident, if I got out of bed every day and showed up as a mother, that was great. I felt like I was still holding my breath. And then about 3 years later, when my heart and soul were ready to go into a different part of the grieving, I met a wonderful woman, maternal love, and she helped me breathe again. She helped me just begin to trust. And then my family moved, and by this time I had 4 kids. I do think that I wasn't planning on having so many children. I was going to do the career and space out too. And after my parents died, I had a need to just bring more life into my world, and which I did, and people all around. So then I met the second woman, and for the first woman, Therese Payne, wonderful woman in San Francisco, then Barbara Lazaroff down in Los Angeles. And Barbara really helped me just live again. And because I did not like to talk about the details of my grief with a lot of people, but I trusted them. And I think it helped that they were older and they brought me maternal love, which is what I really needed to be the best mother that I could be. And I still was in the process of needing maternal love. So I was able to just relax with them. So I wrote a book about this, and I wrote a book, and my message to the world was that human kindness can save you and help you, and it was really great. And so I had completed that book, and then our family was moved to Connecticut, and we got a house out in the woods, and my husband went to work every day, and the kids went to school, and I was so very painfully lonely, and I never knew that emotion. At that time, then we lost my nephew. So I was really in a bad place. And at the same time, I was trying to sell this book about human kindness. And so when I had an editor look at it, she had asked me, well, what are you doing? What have you done? And at that time, I had met this tree, and I do say that again, she's a tree. This tree was just so grand and beautiful, and standing there in my yard as if she was like overlooking the house and letting me know that the kids were okay and I was okay. And I would go on my walks and I would stop and I would talk to her. So when the editor had said to me, well, what are you doing? I was so uncomfortable or not used to being the hero. It was the other women who had saved me. And they were like, no, this is the message that you need to give. And I really struggled with that, but then I realized that for me to really come to terms with my grief, I had to be my own hero. And in my loneliness and with nature, I was able to do that. And it was really great. When we were going, I have this at the end of the book, when we were leaving, because then we moved from that area, it was very hard to leave my tree friend because I talked to her every day. So I went and I bought her a beautiful tree that was purple flowers and heart leaves, and we planted her. And I went to a nursery, and I said to the gentleman there, I said, look, I'm moving tomorrow, but I just planted a tree, which, you know, he just thought I was nuts. And I said, can you give me some nutrients or a way to take care of her in my absence? And he just, you know, brushed me off, and he was like, the tree will be fine. And I was like, no, I want to do something. And he turned around and he said, when she roots herself, she'll take care of herself. And I realized that that's what I did. I had to root myself. So there was, you know, grief takes a very long time. There's you live with it, you know, you never get over the loss. There's no, you know, black and white, and it's ridiculous that people would ever expect that. There's just different spaces with it. You know, I'm 25 years out, and I don't feel anymore that I'm grieving, but that doesn't mean that you can't bring me to tears in a heartbeat with a memory that could bring me right back there. And things, but at that time in my life, my grief was still pretty strong, because I don't know if people are on different, you know, do it at different times. Like one woman, when I was out book touring, said, it seems like, you know, 12, 13, 14 years later, you're still grieving so heavily. Well, that's because I was raising 4 kids. So
Right.
in raising 4 children, I put my grief in a place where it was safe, but I still wasn't able to just, like I like to say, vomit it out. So when I was with Martha, and I had all this time to be by myself, and the kids didn't see it, and which was something really interesting, is when I wrote this book and my kids read it just a couple of years ago, they were really surprised, because they did not feel that I was that sad. And sometimes I don't even know that they understand that I went through this, because it was, you know, it was a big tragedy to lose your mother and father in a phone call. So I was really glad about that. But I think that's why then my grief was so maybe to some prolonged. So with the tree, though, I think the message that I want to give to people is that you, in your own silence and within your own self, and nature is just where you find that is where you will find an inner strength. That is just a really important part of the grieving process. Or for me it is. For me it was.
Yeah. Well, for me, when I read the book, it pointed out to me the very personal and often lonely journey that grief is, right? So it doesn't, like, grief doesn't stop for life. You get up the next day and the sun comes up and life keeps going on, right? You were having children, everyone was living their lives. You had this whole thing going. At the same time, there's this part of you. It's this real thing. It's grief. And it has its own, you know, place in your life. And I thought it was interesting, even particularly at the beginning of the book, when you're, you know, when you're calling and talking to your parents,
My mother's message
your
machine.
mother's message machine, right? Just that idea of, I still need to do something with this. I need, but who do I go to? Like, who do I even talk to this, you know, talk to about this? Because it's kind of a conversation killer at times. It's kind of, you know, where do I go with it? And to me, it's just so compelling that you found a place to go, and one of solitude, but sort of not solitude either, right? Because you were having a conversation.
Yeah, with her, right? Yes, absolutely. And also what happens with grief, and I think, you know, for those who are listening who are in the early stages of it, one thing that I found with mine and other people is, in the beginning, everybody wants to rush to you and help you out, because, you know, it just, I don't know, they get kudos for that, or they're trying to be kind. After an amount of time, people are afraid of grief. It's ugly. And you will feel isolated, because you do get isolated. People will seem to avoid you. And I, even myself, will find that I know of a friend that's really grieving. And if I have a choice, because I'm going about my day, you know, like, I have to say, call them. But I know that when I call them, that's going to be an uncomfortable call. I can see that, you know, people that haven't had my experience would just not call. One, they might not know to, or they may be subconsciously be avoiding someone. But grief does become a very lonely emotion. And people who have not experienced tragedy or in grief, they don't get it, which isn't their fault. It's not their fault. but they don't get it. So
I think there's also something to be said, though, for the fact that, yes, it's lonely, but finding another living being, whatever that might be for someone, even if that being, whether it's a pet or a plant or any of these things, even though it might not be able to talk back, sometimes all you need is like a living being to listen to you and like feel
absolutely.
heard.
Absolutely. And also, like I said, in the beginning, this was 10 years later. In the beginning, I wouldn't have made it to where I was 10 years later if I did not have the human kindness. And so absolutely, we have to, we're pack animals, reach out, and there are people that understand. Absolutely. So you can't be angry at those who don't. You can't be angry at those who aren't comfortable. I think a lot of us going through grief, there's always someone who's going to disappoint us. And sometimes maybe we're not even seeing through the eyes that they're trying. But there are definitely people that do understand, that I think help you through in the beginning. And a plant, an animal, animals are, so many people, their grief and their animals really help.
Right. It's not often when I say to myself, when people say not helpful things unintentionally, they just don't know. As I just say to myself, they just don't know yet. Like that,
Right.
Because it is the human condition. I mean,
Right.
The idea that given enough time, they may yet discover what that is like. And if you don't know, you just don't know. It's like someone who has no kids telling a parent how to raise their kids, right? You go, well, until you've lived with it, you don't know that until you've lived with grief, because it is something that's part of you. You live with it. You don't know. And I've tried to, since that point, try to take a forgiving nature with people, where I just forgive them the minute it even utters out of their mouth. Just don't know yet.
When my parents died, I was young, for 31, and only a couple of my friends had experienced loss. Since then, I've had so many people call and say, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. I would have been there more for you, and I'm okay with it, but they just don't understand. And again, they're lucky. For me, being in a marriage, my husband never had a divorce. There was never a major illness. He was raised in a family that his biggest stress in life was just from work and jobs, and so that also was challenging. And I had to be okay with knowing that he would just never get it, and not to ask him to, not be mad at him to, but then to seek for the love and support that I needed outside of the marriage, which I did, with when I found these other women. And they were just, God sent that they came into my life. And so I hope that everybody has that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing how we can get different things from different people, because people grieve differently. Like your husband was having a different experience than you were, and these women were having a different experience, but we connect it. We, like you were saying, we get our different needs met through different relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important, instead of just saying like nobody understands, trying to like find those really intricate connections between people that we may just not even think that we need, or that these people can, kind of sympathize with us or empathize with us, I should say. But how do you feel like now, while you're kind of in the situation you are now, how are your relationships kind of changing and growing with these individuals who do so much through this?
Well, the women that came into my life and were still loving, we're all 20 years older now. So I find that I'm able to be strength for them. And Barbara and I are, in equals, but Tricias, as I wrote in the book, suffers with lupus. And so she's at a place now where she needs the support. And so I love that I'm able to offer her that. Yeah. One thing I do want to say that I find, like with grief, and I don't know if it's my age or if it's the process of it, but one thing I have allowed myself now much more than ever is I forgive myself, and I allow myself to to know that I'm not ever going to be like all better. So for instance, as I find that my PSTD is getting almost worse with driving if I'm not driving. But to me, a vehicle, a vehicle can kill. And my parents were killed by a vehicle. So if I'm out there with my husband, and especially if I had too much coffee, I find myself, I am definitely a much more anxious than probably the average person, but I don't go, oh, I got to go to therapy and work through that. I say to myself, you know what, of course I have that, and I allow it, because it's not crippling. It's not crippling, but that is something that I probably 10 years ago would have really beaten up on myself about and just tried to get over it. And then when I talk about forgiving myself, I don't even know what I was not forgiving of, but it just seemed like there was a release of just knowing that, grief can mess with your head, and you just gotta, again, vomit it out. One thing I struggle with too is when people will say to me, they just want to do something so they don't cry. It's like, you better cry, and you should cry for a year.
Right.
If people want to take medication because that's what they need, my God, I respect it. But when I was at it, I just allowed myself to just cry when I needed to, and say to people, if you're not comfortable with my grief, sorry, I'm going to cry if we talk about this. But those are the things that people that are going through it that I'd really like to know, is that just do what you want to do. Don't behave so that society is comfortable with your grief.
Yep.
Let it out and make society have to show up. And if society doesn't, because it's something we're not taught, then that's their issue, and they one day will understand.
That's the way we make change in society. Is you don't bend for it, and you I think of it as just being authentic with this happened in my life, and this is who I am as a result of what happened in my life, and I'm somehow becoming. Like, it didn't happen and then I all of a sudden became who I am. It happened, and there was this whole living that happened in the midst of it, and this thing called grief that I carried with me, and there was sadness and anger and fear and all of that, and somehow all of that is making me into that person who I'm moving toward becoming. It's kind of that it's not a finished thing. It continues, and who knows, what the next phase of that.
We do have one thing. When my parents died, I was I don't want to say angry, but I was just like, wait a minute, this isn't fair that my friends get to go see their mom and dad and I don't. So there has to be something here. There has to be a gift from, the universe or God or whoever it is for you, that if I'm smart enough, I can find, because my heart has just been split open. So I was determined to take my pain and be a better person for it. But I think that that's a conscious thought, that if you just let it go, you may find yourself angry. You may find yourself, finding some way to numb the pain. But if you consciously are open to the fact that there is an ability to see deeper, because you have been split open deeper, then you can find it. And I was 100% determined to be more loving, or try to live in my parents' honor, a better life because of the loss. So.
Yeah. There's interesting research out of the University of North Carolina, Ted Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, and they did a lot of research on post-traumatic growth. And just hearing what you just said reminded me of what the things they found when they interviewed people who have gone through tragedy, and how there was personal growth that happened as a result. Not that we would say, well, I want that terrible thing to happen, so no. None of us would ever say that, but they were simply pointing out that growth that happens when you allow yourself the opportunity to experience it and be present with that.
Right, but in that you have to allow the pain. And there can't be the growth without. And I think that's where the women in my life, I had to find people that I could trust to feel like, okay, I could let go of this. One thing I did for years and years and years was I broke glass with my imagination. Yeah. And so I could be, all dressed up at a wedding or at a party and talking to you and smiling. And in my imagination, over your head, I was just smashing windows. And it took me 5 years to have the trust to tell my sister. And she said to me, I cock a gun. And, yeah, and that's just how we, in our imaginations, just had to be like, bam, bam, bam. Just because, and that's where, again, when I say forgive yourself, like, I didn't think there's anything wrong with me for doing that. I knew that I had such tragedy and pain in me that if I didn't get that out, I don't know, I don't know where I would be. But that's, just part of my process.
I feel like that's interesting, thinking about like how we all cope differently, and sometimes doing things in private that we think are like socially unacceptable, like we were just talking about, but being like honest enough to like share that with someone and then having it normalized. Like, yeah, that's completely normal. That is such a validation to, we shouldn't care about how we're going about our grief journey, but sometimes it's nice to just be like, oh, okay, I'm not alone in feeling like that, and just kind of like connecting on those weird little things sometimes can be so
Well, we all
special.
think we're different, and we really aren't. We're so much more alike. I always said there'd be so much less stress in the world if we all had televisions on our head and it said what our thoughts were, because then we would all realize that all our crazy thoughts, I mean, of course, there's a small percentage that may, hopefully we're not all thinking like them, but we do all, we're all human and have same emotions and thoughts. And if we just would just trust and share that, then we probably would all just feel a lot better about ourselves.
Well, this has been a great conversation. We actually only have a few minutes left, but before we do that, I'm wondering if people who are listening and they're going through a difficult time, or wherever they are in their grief or their journey in life, I wonder if what would you want to say to them, just as an encouragement, or as a what words would you have for that person who's listening to this and they're going through something immediately right now?
To love themselves. Just take care of themselves, to love themselves, focus on themselves, watch what, especially in the beginning, watch what you're eating and sleeping, and try to, take care of your body as much as you can, because that will affect your thoughts. So I would love yourself, but I would get it out. Don't hold it back. And if people aren't comfortable, that's their, again, they just don't understand. Take walks, get out in nature. I think nature is super, super healing. Sitting by the ocean and watching wave after wave. But I would say the main issue would be, find people who love you, but the first person who has to love you is yourself. And, and treat yourself like you would treat if someone else you loved. Another game I would play with myself is I would have these thoughts going on, and I would pretend I was sitting on the couch across from myself being the therapist. And I'd be like, the way I would handle somebody else versus handle myself. So it's like, just back off yourself a little bit and understand that you need some time. And also, it won't always feel this horrible. It never goes away. We wouldn't want it to go away, but time will help you. It's on your side.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
If someone's looking to connect, or looking for information on your books or your writings or your publications, or how can they connect with you?
I have a website, TriciaLaVoice.com. And that should be on my bio. And if you go there, then we talk. I did some wishes, and then Dear Martha, we have podcasts there, and there's email. They can reach me anyway there.
Great. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Tricia, we want to thank you for coming and being our guest on Let's Talk Death, and for really talking about some wonderful, unique outlets for grief and normalizing that we all do this. It's okay to happen. So we really appreciate all of your information as well.
Well, it's wonderful to have been here. Thank you. Anything I could do to help?
So for those who are watching this episode, If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, you can visit us at healgrief.org. You can also learn more about Heal Grief's program Actively Moving Forward, which is for young adults, by visiting the website healgrief.org.
Let's Talk Death episodes will air monthly, so make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter link for next month's episode.
So with that, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.